Hello and welcome back to A Moment of Focus, your go-to compliance podcast where we'll continue to bring you the latest and greatest compliance updates and available resources. I'm your host, Caleb Diaz. Now let's talk compliance. All right, it is a brand new year and we have a lot of great guidance, perspective, and content planned for you that I think you're really going to appreciate. So, to kick off this new year, we're going to get started with a cyber roundup with Tom DeMeo from PKF O'Connor Davies. Tom, hello, and thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with us today.
Hey, Caleb, how we doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. So this month, not only did you write a cyber roundup for January, but you also wrote an additional article about the security breach at SolarWinds, which, if anyone doesn't know what that is, it's an IT vendor that is used by a whole host of different industries and businesses. And that's a very broad way of putting it, but Tom, I think you can probably go into more detail on that. So could we talk about this security breach and why it may be relevant for our clients to know about what happened?
Sure. The SolarWinds breach, which, if you're not familiar with, effectively you had this company that, produces software that monitors and helps manages networks, and global company, and obviously in thousands and thousands of networks throughout the world. Effectively they were compromised, by a nation state actor. At this point, it looks like it's fingers have been pointed at Russia in terms of what was done. But effectively, they infiltrated SolarWinds. They got into a position where they could inject malicious code, into their code base, and that malicious code was effectively pumped out, to all the customers of SolarWinds via an update, which ultimately let these state actors into a lot of high-profile companies, Microsoft, the government, so on and so forth. But I think the thing to really take away from that is, it really does kind of show us how vulnerable anyone is. When you look at some of the companies that were impacted by that, you're talking Fortune 500 companies that spend an enormous amount of money in this area. So anything can happen. And it goes back to that philosophy, it's not a matter of if, but it really is when, and when you look at, your strategy moving forward for this year, I think it's very important to kind of step back and think about, do you really have a successful plan? Can you detect and respond in a timely manner? Now, don't get me wrong, this SolarWinds incident, to be able to detect that, obviously, it required the best of the best, and a lot of smaller entities would have difficulty. But there's a lot of things that you can detect, and there's a lot of things that you can prepare for and respond. And I think that's one of the key things to take away from this. Third-party risk, it's not going to go away. Cyber risk is not going to go away, and you need to have that plan to go into it. So, I did want to touch on that because obviously that was something that was fairly huge in terms of the cyber industry, because it, foundationally, it hit something that is very hard to get away from, supply chain risk and things that I'm sure is going to continue to happen going forward.
Oh, definitely. I think it's really important to realize how interconnected our technology is. We utilize service providers to store our data, and one security breach on the other side of the world could be detrimental to our businesses. That's why it's so important to be alert for risks and cybercrime and be aware of current trends. Now speaking of staying alert, one of the instances you talked about in your cyber roundup was GoDaddy's use of internal phishing emails to train employees on cybersecurity. And I thought that was a really good example of how firms can teach their employees to be on the lookout and stay aware and stay vigilant.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the GoDaddy component because, I think it really highlights something. I work with a lot of different companies, and everyone has their own take on phishing and, should we do it? Is it deceptive? Is it wrong to do that to the employees? And I think when you look at it in that fashion, you're missing the point of really the value of what you're trying to accomplish. At our firm, we phish our employees 3 times a month at a minimum, because it really is such a tremendous risk. And, it's not that we're doing it because, we want to entrap anybody, or, we're trying to embarrass anybody, or, to turn it into a negative process. the value is that we're trying to help them learn and evolve and how to identify these types of things, which is not only going to benefit us as a firm, but it's going to benefit them as an individual. Phishing is going to happen. Whether you test it or not, it's going to happen. And if you can get yourself ahead of it as a business, that is what you want to do. And sometimes even with the whole pandemic, there was a lot of, should we leverage the pandemic and what it created to phish our employees? And, my traditional response has been yes, because the cyber criminals, they're not going to take to the sensitivity of your employees. They're going to leverage that exact situation. And that's how you really have to, those are the situations you want to train your employees, because those are the situations that are going to trigger that emotional response in the employee to get them to do something. And that's what you want to control. That's that conditioned response you want to build into them, so that regardless of the circumstance, regardless of the global impact or the personal impact, they kind of know to pause, inspect, and think and work it through before they do anything.
Yeah, you make a great point. It should never be the goal of a cybersecurity training or compliance training, for that matter, to make people feel bad about themselves and embarrassed. The goal really should be to strengthen and build a well-rounded and secure cybersecurity and compliance program that will protect the clients, employees, and the firm. And to do that, you have to find weaknesses. So it's really important, I think, to send out phishing emails and test your employees. I was scrolling through email the other night on my phone, my personal email, and there was something from Microsoft that just looked weird. And I was able to use some of the training that I've received here at Focus One and some of the training that we do on our compliance training to figure out that this email was probably a scam and I should not be clicking on it unless I wanted to lose all my identification. So I just deleted it and didn't touch it. It's stuff like that I think it's really important to train your employees to make sure that they don't allow anything to come through those cracks.
Oh yeah, and look, and exactly the way you phrase it is exactly the type of awareness you want to build in. You stopped, you thought it through, you went through the motions because you knew the motions and how to identify it, and at the end of the day, you came out ahead, right? You identified that it was malicious, and that's what you want to empower every employee to be able to do.
Exactly. Employee empowerment is really such an important part of maintaining a well-rounded cybersecurity program. Employees should feel like they have the tools, the knowledge, and the guidance to really deflect any cyber hacks coming their way, any phishing scams. So it's just important to make sure that the employees know that they have the power. Now, another topic I did want to discuss was password vaults. I saw this on your Cyber Roundup, and it was really great timing because we've recently had a few clients reach out with questions regarding password vaults, such as which one should I use? Are they secure? Am I better off writing my passwords on paper? So could you give us some guidance on that?
Absolutely. So, password manager, and again, for any of the listeners that aren't fully aware of what that is, that's a piece of software that in effect will securely store, create, and remember your passwords for you, right? So the benefit is obviously, you go to a website and it's going to know what website you're on, and it's going to know, the username and password for it. The benefit being obviously one, now that you as the individual, you don't have to remember it. And two, you could let the password manager pick a nice, strong, 40-character password that's random, because there's never any intention of you having to remember it. When you look at your password managers, I think one, this is an area where you do want, something that is reputable. I wouldn't necessarily go with, some new kid on the block when it comes to this, but your LastPass is your one pass. They have a tendency to be a little bit more reputable. And I think too, to truly get the benefit, there's obviously an element of risk of putting it in the cloud, but you do want that password manager to have that cloud presence, in the sense that, regardless if you're on your laptop at work, you're on your phone at home, you always have access to that password manager, because if you don't have that access, then quite frankly, it's not going to work. So you definitely want that password manager. The other key thing to think about is, that password manager becomes the one key to rule them all, right? That one password to get into that password manager is going to unlock everything that you have in it. So that password getting in, one, has to be incredibly strong, and two, that is where you really want to start to think about putting multi-factor authentication on, because if not, again, that becomes the weak link in that cyber kill chain.
Thank you. I think that's really good to hear. And I feel like this is a technology that clients and firms will probably start using more and more because, we want to make sure those passwords are strong. We want to make sure information is protected. And sometimes it's hard to remember and you just need a little help. And so utilizing a password manager to make sure you don't forget those passwords is probably going to be very important. And Tom, thank you so much again for just taking the time to sit down and chat with us. I appreciate it, and I know our clients really will too.
No, my pleasure.
All right, well, that is all for today's episode of A Moment of Focus. Make sure to like and subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn, and check out our blog, or if you're a Focus One client, your -7 dashboard. We'll be sending out a link to Tom's Cyber Roundup, as well as a link to the first article that we discussed today. And from all of us here at Focus One, have a great week and stay compliant.